This video will explain the moon in the 7th house, and I will explain what it symbolizes, and I'll show you how to actually read it in real charts using 3 well-known people. But the best place to begin this discussion is by understanding what the moon itself symbolizes and what the 7th house itself symbolizes. And here is the 7th house. Literally, physically, it is the area of the sky that is right around the western horizon. And that's why it symbolizes what it symbolizes, because the western horizon is where the sunset happens. And the sunset represents 2 things: disappearance and other people. The reason it represents disappearance is obvious: the sun disappears. The reason it represents other people is a little less obvious. It's, again, because the sun disappears and the sun represents self. So if self takes a back seat, that means other people become prominent. So those are the 2 basic symbolisms of the 7th house: disappearance and other people. That's why the 7th is the house of endings, and please be clear that it is the house of endings and the house of death. But the 6th and the 8th house are more instrumental in bringing about or preventing death. Yet the 7th house is about the death itself. And it's also about things just going away or dispersing. It's a house of travel or even losing things. Obviously, the 7th house is very famous as the house of marriage and partners, because it's the house of others and our relationship with others. And this is why it's the house of intercourse, which has a sexual connotation and also just means, in basic, how we relate with other people and how we cooperate with other people. And finally, it's a house of exchange or commerce or business, because that's one of the ways in which we relate with other people. Now, doing the same thing for the moon, when you look at the moon, you realize that it's bright, but you only see it at night. And so it has a sort of a dichotomy or a dipolarity to it, that it's bright, but it only comes out when it's night. So it's bright and dark at the same time. And hence it represents things which are fluctuating, things which are dipolar, things which are one thing and the other. They're fluid. They go back and forth between states. Because it's bright, it represents things that attract your eye and are beautiful. And because it's night, it represents things that are unseen and private. So things that are shy or personal or domestic. Also, because it's unseen, it represents things that are internal. This is why it represents the mind. What is the mind? The mind is the emotional sense. What is an emotion? An emotion is a reaction to fulfilling or not fulfilling a desire. And what is a desire? A desire is a want based on an opinion. And so the moon represents all these things: subjectivity, bias, opinions, which generate desires, which generate emotions, which are experienced by the mind. Also, since it's internal, it represents the internal gender, which is female. And since it's bright, it represents power and authority. But since it's female, it represents matriarchal or maternal power and feminine authority. Now we're clear about what the moon represents and what the 7th house represents. We can go ahead and figure out how to mix them and understand what the moon represents when it's in the 7th house. But the 7th house is a bit different than the rest of the houses because it's exactly around the western horizon. And concomitant with that, planets always have an aspect, full power, to their opposition. In other words, to the point that's 180 degrees across the sky from them. So, if a planet is in the 7th house, it therefore very likely affects the ascendant by its aspect. The more that you see it line up to the ascendant, you'll get these effects from the moon in the 7th house, which don't really have to do that much with the 7th house, have more to do with the moon affecting the ascendant. The physical properties of the planet in the 7th house come out by affecting the ascendant. So in the case of the moon, we expect visual beauty. They're beautiful, they look good, they attract the eye. And while the physical aspects of the planet affect the ascendant, the other aspects of the planet affect the descendant. In other words, the planet is disappearing. It's going down over the western horizon. So why the physical parts affect the ascendant is because the ascendant is physical. But the rest of this stuff sets. So in the moon's case, it's the setting of the mother mostly. So it's a distance from mother, or it may be like a distance from emotionalness. Now those are the two unique effects of the moon in the 7th house by virtue of its relationship to the ascendant, which you should check by degree to see how intense those will be in a particular chart. There's another 3 effects that come from the way the moon combines with the 7th house. So for example, the moon is a very domestic planet, and the 7th house is a marriage house. And that's a favorable combination of symbolisms. Also, the moon is a feminine planet, and the 7th house is a partnership house. That's also a favorable combination of symbolism because femininity does well with partnership. Also, the moon is a very cyclic planet, but the 7th house is a very final house. So this is a non-harmonious interaction of the symbolism. And if we explore these 3 things about how the moon resonates with the 7th house, we'll get a good intuition for what the interpretation of the moon in the 7th house should be. To spell out a little bit, the part about the moon being domestic and the 7th house being marriage, that means that you probably have a good marriage. You have a desirable marriage partner. On the second thing, femininity and partnership, it's a similar effect. You're attractive to partners. People want to marry you. You're a desirable partner. But also your partnerships function well for you. You have prosperous partnerships. And then on the non-harmonious resonance of cyclicity in the moon, but finality in the 7th house, this is like a problem with endings. And they want newness. They need the cycle to go around, and they need stimulation and newness. That's a good basic template to work from to understand the moon in the 7th house. But we should also look at it in real charts to see how this basic template actually plays out in some specific cases. So let's use 3 high-profile people: Marilyn Monroe, Hugh Hefner, and Jeffrey Dahmer. Marilyn Monroe, if we ask her if she's visually beautiful, she's going to answer yes, of course. Why so much? Well, look at the moon. It is quite well aligned with the ascendant. It's at 19 degrees, and the ascendant is at 13. So you can expect a lot of the effect of the aspect of the moon to the ascendant, which is a lot of beauty. In addition to that, her moon is joined with Jupiter, who is the 8th lord. The 8th lord is reproductive and sexy. So the beautiful moon in the 7th house aspecting the ascendant is conjoined with Jupiter, which is a reproductive planet, owning the 8th house, the reproductive house. So it's a sexy kind of beauty that really comes through. And then really to make it sure that she's very beautiful, her first lord, the sun, is in the 11th house, Gemini, with the 11th lord, Mercury. Mercury is very good looking, not in the sense of sexy, but in the sense of just well formed. So she's getting sexiness from the 8th lord, and she's getting the well formedness from the 11th house and the 11th lord, and the beauty and attractiveness and this kind of sparkle from the moon. If we ask Marilyn if she was distanced from her mother, which is the effect of the moon setting, she will also say yes, very much, because she was raised by her grandmother, right? So what is that? Well, besides having the moon in the 7th house, it's supported by the fact that her 4th lord is in the 8th house. And this is important for you to understand about astrology, is real effects don't come from having just one indication in a chart. Real effects come from having multiple indications in a chart. So moon in the 7th house is one indication of being distanced from mother. It's not going to become a reality if that's the only thing in the chart that indicates distance from the mother. But in Monroe's case, in addition to the moon in the 7th, the 4th lord is in the 8th, and the 6th lord, Saturn, is in the 4th. If we ask Marilyn if she had prosperous partnerships, she would say kind of financially, but not maritally. Her marital partnerships didn't work out. And why is that? Well, on one hand, it's really nice that she has the moon and Jupiter in the 7th house, but it's for a Leo ascendant. So that means that the moon is the 12th lord and Jupiter is the 8th lord. So her 7th house has the 12th and 8th lords in it. And while that is very sexy, it doesn't give a stable marriage. But as far as the financial partnerships being good, the first lord being in the 11th house, Gemini with Mercury, is great for that. And if we ask her if she, doesn't like ends or she gets bored easy, she needs newness, she'll say yes for sure. And that's one reason, is just having the first lord in the 11th house with Mercury while you have moon in the 7th house. Now, let's take a look at a sort of similar person, Hugh Hefner. Is he visually beautiful? Well, he's not the worst looking guy in the world, but he's very into visual beauty. And he says, yeah, I really love visual beauty. I took a lot of photos of it. So you could see that in his case, his moon in the 7th house is his 11th lord. And it is conjoined with his 9th lord, who's exalted, and who is Venus. So here he's really profiting from the visual beauty of others. We ask him if he's distanced from his mother, he will also say yes. He's very unlike his mother, and his whole move towards being the Hugh Hefner that we know was kind of as a reaction against the puritanical nature of his mother and father. So we would say yes, and again, like Monroe, it has to do with his 4th house, supporting that his 4th lord is in the 6th with Mars. Does he have prosperous partnerships? He would say, yeah, I really had great partnerships with many people, and financially as well as romantically, not maritally, but only after a divorce did that happen. So one thing about his chart is you could see the 7th lord is also Jupiter. So the 7th lord is also in the 6th house with Mars. And if we asked if he needed newness and got bored easily and stuff like that, yes. I mean, look at him. And I think what would really support that, besides his moon in the 7th house setting, is Rahu in the 11th. Moving on to the third and final chart, Jeffrey Dahmer. If we ask if he's visually beautiful, yeah, he's not bad looking for a serial killer. Was he distanced from his mother? This is the oh my god point. This is the thing that really defines Jeffrey Dahmer, is the distanced mother, the missing mother, the missing parental affection, and especially the missing maternal affection. What's going on in his chart is really that his 4th house has the debilitated 6th lord Jupiter. So that debilitated 6th lord in the 4th house with the 4th lord is really wrecking it. Why? Because his moon in the 7th house is a Revati moon. That's the combo. A Revati moon is very susceptible to the quality of its parenting. That's the nature of Revati. The indication about his parenting is that his mother has severe problems, because both the 4th lord and the 4th house have debilitated Jupiter in contact with them, and the moon has Mars in contact with it. If we say, did you have prosperous partnerships, he would probably answer no. And really the problem is the 7th lord is staying in the 7th house. If the 7th lord doesn't leave the 7th house, how does it form partnerships? By staying in the 7th house, what does it do? It causes a malefic planet to influence the moon. And what is the nature of that malefic planet? It's Mars in Aries, and what nakshatra? It's in Uttara Bhadrapada. What is Mars in Uttara Bhadrapada all about? Well, from my nakshatra report, which is a new report that I offer, you can get a link to it below. You can get your own nakshatra report. It explains his Mars in Uttara Bhadrapada as an indication of dissatisfaction with conventional pleasures, not being able to find happiness in regular things, and feeling of anger about being unhappy. That's what's really affecting his moon. And then the very interesting thing with him is that he's obsessed with death. And when we ask him if he needs newness, remember this question comes from the clash of the cyclicity of the moon versus the finality of the 7th house. And does he need newness? He says, I need endings. I'm obsessed with death. And if you look at his first lord is in the 8th house, which is very connected with death. And again, look at the nakshatra of that first lord. It's in Kritika as Venus. So what does Venus in Kritika represent according to the nakshatra report that I offer? It represents that you probably like art and you might be good at art, but your relationships of love are very challenged. There's a Kritika is an axe. That's a blade. And Venus is love. So the two symbols don't go well together. But unfortunately, these two symbols are so vivid for Jeffrey Dahmer, the cannibal, the homosexual cannibal rapist. Besides that, for Jeffrey Dahmer to really understand him, it's quite important to bear in mind what Rahu is like when it's in Uttara Phalguni. According to my nakshatra report, Rahu in Uttara Phalguni signifies unusual projects and partnerships and often voracious needs. If you combine all those things, it really defines Dahmer well. And really the key thing with this chart is the debilitated Jupiter. The debilitated Jupiter in the house of the mother with the Lord of the mother, screwing up everything else because of the dependency upon his mother because of having the moon in Revati. If you want to actually have my interpretations for all of your placements in your chart, you can go to my website and order that from the charts page. It's victorcara.com/R2. Thank you so much.